So as mentioned, Sherry and I are realtors and developers in Victoria. What I want to do is kind of run through some of the things that I've been looking at over the last 10 days as I've prepared this presentation. Every time I research and create a real estate presentation like this, I come across things that really surprise me. Here are just a few of the surprises this time around. The degree to which immigration is going to drive population growth in Canada. How many Canadians are rethinking retirement because of COVID? Just how bad the inventory problem is in and around Victoria. How much Esquimalt area is taken up by its largest employer. And the expected growth for BC's senior population in the next 20 years. I think you'll be surprised by some of this stuff as well. My premise is that Esquimalt might just be the center of the real estate investing universe. Now, I've been tasked with the plan of showing Esquimalt as the place to be, and that Esquimalt is now the time. So I'm going to go through a bunch of material here, and hopefully you'll come to the same conclusion that I have. Some of the things that you might want to ask yourself at the end of this presentation is, what's your gut feeling about this? Is my reasoning systematic? Is the evidence that I've presented verifiable? And is the source credible? I'm going to start global, and then I'm going to go local. So we'll start with some global issues, some Canadian issues, some provincial issues. I'm going to zoom in on regional issues, the capital region, specifically the Victoria Core, Esquimalt city issues, and neighborhood issues. So let's start with the global issues and the fact that we now have 7.8 billion people on the planet. The good news is that the yearly growth rate is going down. That means that the increase in population is just a paltry 81 million people per year. The bad news is this is the chart for population growth on the planet. By 2023, we're going to have 8 billion people. By 2037, we're going to have 9 billion and so forth. These people will need housing. Where will they want to live? Well, overall, the best countries ranking, Canada is in the top 5, according to the US News and World Report. In fact, ranked number 2. If we look at places that are open for business, Canada ranks in the top 3. If we look at quality of life, according to the US News and World Report, Canada is number 1. Canadian immigration policy ranked among the top 5 in the world, according to the Migrant Integration Policy Index of 2020. And when they look at the best countries for immigrants, Canada, number 1. Canada was rated the best country in the world for welcoming immigrants, scored an 8.46, indicating that Canadians are the most welcoming people in the world when it comes to immigration. Interest in immigrating to Canada is increasing amid the coronavirus pandemic. The proportion of respondents who are more interested in immigrating to Canada grew from 38 to 46% in August of 2020. Most say economic hardship and the ability to pay costs of immigration will not have a negative impact or reduce their interest. Canada has dramatically increased the number of immigrants that they're planning to welcome to the country. More than 1.2 million newcomers between 2021 and 2023. Of course, that's after the pandemic is winding down. Why all this focus on immigration, you might ask? Well, according to the Conference Board of Canada report, immigration will account for 100% of Canada's population growth by 2034. Further, according to the same report, immigration already accounts for almost 100% of Canada's labor force growth. So immigration and those numbers are extremely important. When we look at millionaire migration, there's an interesting thing occurring. Canada attracting 4,000 millionaire immigrants. The United States, by contrast, 10,000. And if you think about the fact that the United States has 10 times the population, you could say that Canada has a 4-fold leg up on the United States in this. Canada wants immigrants, and immigrants want Canada. 42% of new immigrants in 2019 were from India, China, and the Philippines. And 60% went to Ontario and BC in 2019. The Atlantic region is a glaring example of the perils of weak population growth. According to the Conference Board of Canada, the region has experienced a vicious cycle of slow economic growth, low public and private sector investment, and difficulties retaining its own residents and immigrants. And the Conference Board of Canada did what's called an economic report card. And what they did here is they looked at each province, and then they also looked at Canada versus 16 peer countries, and then gave everybody a grade. And only Ireland and the province of British Columbia received an A grade. Where do Canadians plan to retire and why? Well, most people who don't want to retire in their own province, many people want to retire to British Columbia. That's the case in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. That's the case in Alberta, some in Quebec, and of course, all the British Columbians are already here. Being inadequately prepared for retirement has compelled almost 1 in 3 Canadians to sell their homes, according to the Bank of Montreal Wealth Institute. Housing is one of the most important factors when it comes to where people plan on spending their retirement. If you look at net interprovincial migration in the first 6 months of 2020, there wasn't net increase in some of the maritime provinces, but most of the increase across Canada went to BC. We are attracting most of the net interprovincial migration. And most of that interprovincial migration is coming from Alberta, and then followed by Ontario, and then Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The province of BC tends to add about 1 million new residents every 20 years or so. So this is one of those surprises I mentioned earlier. Planning for the future, the BC population. In 2020, the BC population was 5.1 million. In 21 years, it's going to be 6.5 million. But look how this breaks out. That increase is 26.77%. The working age population in the next 20 years is expected to grow by 20%. The youth population by 12.5%. And now look at this. The senior population is expected to grow 63%. That, of course, is the result of the baby boom, as the baby boom retires. Canada's baby boom, born in 1946 to 1964. If we flip this around, this is what it looks like moving forward in time. Right now is when most of the baby boomers would be most active in retirement, of course. If we add 10 years, then that baby boom generation is going to be a little less active than it is now. 8 million Canadians are currently rethinking retirement because of COVID-19. 5% of Canadians who say they have moved back in with their parents as a result of COVID-19. So there's a lot of movement of people taking place, and 278,000 Canadian parents have moved in with their adult children as a result of COVID-19. We're going to need a bigger house. 1.8 million Canadians have provided financial support to adult children due to COVID, and 63% of retirees are willing to provide that financial support, even if it jeopardizes their own financial future. Right now, we're all facing the same storm, but we're doing so in different boats. So if you're wondering why others are faring better or worse than you at the moment, perhaps worth considering what kind of a boat they are in. 76% of Canada's national wealth is wrapped up in real estate. And so the question that I have is, how are Canadians going to access their wealth in order to retire? And so some of the options are downsize to a less expensive property, i.e. from a house to a condo, downsize to a less expensive market, i.e. from Vancouver to Victoria, both, or something other than that, like rent instead of own. So we can likely look for an accelerated migration of people and money as Canadians, Vancouverites, cash out to retire. According to the Bank of Montreal, 15% of baby boomers chose Victoria as the top retirement destination in Canada. And the question is the deluge already starting despite COVID? I'm here to tell you, I think that it is. Already happening. We have record sales. BC housing sales brisk as 2021 arrives. BC real estate defies pandemic with sales and price growth. Sales up 20% on the island. Real estate sales across Southern Island hit new record. 0.7% vacancy rate, the lowest in North America, and average lease rates the highest in Canada. Victoria has the strongest industrial market among capital cities in Western Canada, and Victoria sees the biggest monthly price growth. This is a chart that shows what the number of sales, this isn't prices, this is the number of sales in the months of July to October between 2000 and 2020. So this is the year 2020, and you can see that July, August, September, and October were the highest in the number of sales that they've been in the last 20 years. And it was a record in November, and it was a record in December. This is what it looks like in the last 4 years. So the number of sales for each of the months, July, August, September, October, November, and December, way more sales despite COVID, and over 51% increase in the number of sales over 2019. This is in Greater Victoria. So the spread continues to be one of the most important drivers of the Greater Victoria market. And if you've heard me talk before, you probably know what I mean by this spread. If not, this is what I mean by this spread. The difference in single-family home prices in Greater Vancouver compared to Greater Victoria. The spread is still a very substantial $734,000. Greater Victoria is on sale, despite a dramatic drop in sales and a plethora of unsold listings. The benchmark price for a house in Greater Victoria is still $1.56 million. In fact, the average price is even higher at $1.76 million. This is what you get for $1.56 in East Van. This 2-bedroom, 1-bath house just sold this month for $1.7. Excuse me. This recently sold for $1.7. This recently sold for $1.75. This recently sold for $1.82, $125,000 above the list price. Meanwhile, in Greater Victoria, this 6-bedroom, 2-bathroom home on 4,700 finished square feet of living space sold December 29th with ocean views and 2.41 acres of land for $1.45. One of these things is not like the other. This is where I normally do a Kermit the Frog impression. I have a bit of a frog in my throat right now. Actually, I'm going to try it. Or one of these things is not like the other. I do have a frog in my throat. All right, the difference in single-family home prices in Greater Vancouver compared to Greater Victoria, there is not just a price difference. There's a huge value difference as well. This 2-bedroom, 1-bath home on 4,000 square foot lot is now for sale on Vancouver's west side for $2.78 million. That kind of money gets you waterfront in Greater Victoria, a brand new 2020 built home on the ocean with views like this, sold November 30th for $2.75. You could have this or you could have that. The benchmark price for Vancouver's west side, so that's kind of west of Cambie, is now $3.16 million. And if residents of Vancouver's west side again manage to cash out, the most likely destination on the island is Victoria's Oak Bay neighborhood. And this is the difference in price between the two high-flying neighborhoods of West Side and Victoria's Oak Bay. The spread between the two was $422,000 in 2005, $2.6 million in September 2018 when it reached a peak, but it's still, oh, by the way, the foreign buyer tax was introduced at that point. You can see what an impact it had. And then the spread now is $1.9 million. Is it any wonder that Victoria seems on sale to many Vancouverites? This house in Oak Bay was listed for 1.4 on January 4th, sold for 1.6, $212,000 above the list price. So far in 2021, 47 single-family homes have sold in the core of Victoria. 23 have sold for less than the list price. 24 have sold at or above the list price. A few days ago, this 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home was listed in the core in View Royal for $629. Only one home in the core was cheaper. It sold this week for $725, almost $100,000 over the list price, and the sellers had 19 offers to choose from. The top 25 destinations of international migrants, Canada is ranked 8th. Victoria, by the way, only gets a mere 3% of the international immigrants to BC. Vancouver gets about 85 to 90%. Generally, our market is not directly impacted by foreign buyers or investors. Excuse me. If anything, we are indirectly impacted by foreign buyers via offshore migrants from Vancouver. The spillover has been happening with buyers already as they look to get a bang for their buck. Unaffordable Hong Kong looks to more affordable Vancouver. And so it goes. Vancouver looks to Victoria, Fraser Valley, Nanaimo, Comox Valley, and Kelowna. As in California, severely unaffordable housing has spread from the least affordable major markets. Here in Canada, it's Vancouver and Toronto. In British Columbia, this is evident in Victoria, Fraser Valley, Nanaimo, Comox Valley, Chilliwack, and Kelowna. Now think about how COVID has been accelerating change. Home prices are creating more lifetime renters. Toronto residential rents are dropping because of COVID. California, there's an exodus intensifying as retirees, teachers, musicians seek cheaper, less crowded pastures. And the question I have is, are renters going to make the same moves that buyers are, looking for a more affordable alternative? At this point, I do want to make a distinction about Greater Victoria. I think this is important to make for anybody that's not familiar with Victoria so much. So here's the difference. Greater Victoria, this is the whole region kind of thing. So the Greater Victoria Regional District, and it's fantastic, or as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, it's fantastic. However, the city of Victoria right now, in my opinion, is meh. And I'll get to the reason why. Here are a few other reasons why both buyers and renters might consider Greater Victoria. Average annual rainfall, a fraction of Vancouver. The difference between Victoria and other coastal BC cities is striking and again points to the importance of the Olympic mountain rain shadow in impacting Victoria's climate. How much does it impact Victoria's climate? Well, quite a bit compared to Vancouver. The blue line, that's Victoria's rain. The green lines, that's Vancouver's rain. Vancouver wins in January. Vancouver wins the rain derby in February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, and November, and even December by quite some margin. That looks like double the rain to me. Victoria gets more. I grew up mostly in and around Vancouver, so don't give me a hard time, Vancouver. Victoria gets more sunshine than 82% of Canada's urban population. According to Money Sense magazine, Victoria is the place to buy. Of course, the other places on this list are a bit of a head shaker to me, and I have lived in Toronto. You will notice the icicles across the top of the slide here, indicating like, why would somebody want to, anyway. Average daily maximum temperatures for December, January, and February. Victoria, 8.8. Look at Halifax, Toronto, Hamilton, Oshawa down below, close to 0. Average number of days per year that the temperature stays at freezing in Victoria, 1. Looks like 40 in Toronto, Halifax, Calgary, and Windsor on average. Victoria is ranked number 7 best city in the world by Condé Nast, number 2 best small city, number 5th best city by Monocle, named one of the 10 friendliest cities, most romantic city 6 years in a row. What? 3 years in a row named as the best Canadian city to live in for women. Western Investor, 6 top landlord cities, Victoria was number 1. Top 10 greenest cities, Victoria number 1. Victoria ranks 7th in Canadian tech talent, and it's beautiful too. Now, I need to knock on wood here because, anyway, we've even been lucky in terms of the number of reported COVID cases so far. So if you look on the left, those are the BC cases. And then if you look in the middle chart, that's Vancouver Island. And so in terms of total cases, even though the population of BC on Vancouver Island is 17%, we've only had 2% of the total cases. We've only had 1.6% of the deaths. We've been extremely lucky. Active cases, 4,300 in BC, 184 on Vancouver Island. And on southern Vancouver Island right now, we only have 27 active cases. So this is me knocking on wood. Canadians usually save 2 to 3% of their disposable income. I got this stat just this afternoon, that savings rate jumped to 28% in the second quarter of 2020 and 14.6% in Q3. So that's the impact of COVID on Canada household savings rate, which is just out of this world. But it's the cost of living, not COVID or more sunshine, that might cause renters to make a move. Monthly rent savings. So if you move to Victoria from Vancouver and you rent there and you rent here, this is the kind of savings you could look at. On average, you'd save, this is median rent, by the way, for this month. You'd save $223 if you moved from a studio to a studio in Victoria. You'd save $400 a month if you moved into a 1-bedroom here. You'd save $665 a month for a 2-bedroom and over $900 a month. That's a month by moving from Vancouver to Victoria. Now you know why we've been building rental buildings in Greater Victoria since 2014. This is a rental building that we opened in 2017 in March. This shows the rental demand. This is the first day that the show suite opened, and we were fully tenanted in this building 1 month before we opened. This is looking at Langford. So Langford is the fastest growing, or has been one of the fastest growing municipalities in all of BC. This looks at the 1-bedroom number of apartments built. So 1-bedroom number of units in October 2016 was 168. By October 2019, because of all the building, there were 480. So that's an increase in 3 years of 186%. And then now look at the vacancy rate over the same period of time. It went from 0 to 0.6%. So all that building hardly impacted the vacancy rate at all. It hardly moved the needle at all. So that says there's more rental buildings still, there's still a demand. Meanwhile, in terms of rents, 1-bedroom rents went up 26% and 2-bedroom rents there went up 30%. What I like to focus on, and what I recommend people do when they're looking at this sort of stuff, is focus on the fundamentals: immigration, trends, things like supply and demand, population, rents, and prices. Unemployment would be something to look at. In Victoria, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Let's look at supply for people wanting to buy in Victoria. This is nuts. Like it's beyond nuts. So this is the current inventory chart, and it looks normal. So seasonal high, seasonal low, seasonal high. What this is the number of properties on the market. So you, as you would note, you know, if you're wanting to put your house on the market in March or April, you would expect to have more competition because there's more homes on the market. And then in December and January, there would be fewer properties and so on. So that's kind of a normal looking chart. The problem is the level of it. That's the normal level up above, and that's where we are now. We have hundreds and hundreds of fewer listings than we would normally have. In fact, we have an inventory crisis yet again. Number of homes on the market in January 2021. These are various neighborhoods in and around Greater Victoria that have one house on the market in the entire neighborhood, one. Here are some other neighborhoods in and around Victoria. They have no houses on the market, none, not one. If you want to invest or develop in Victoria, where should you focus? Before I get into that, let's look at the overall assessment of the housing market by CMHC most recently. Greater Victoria, in terms of the market overheating, there's no degree of vulnerability there. In terms of price acceleration, again, weak in terms of the degree of vulnerability. Overbuilding, according to CMHC, we're not overbuilding, and we're moderately overvalued, again, according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So let's review all these areas for proximity, price, and how development friendly they are. And I'll work through this fairly quickly. The Saanich Peninsula, this is that area. Swartz Bay, by the way, up above at the top would be where the ferry comes in from Vancouver, from Tsawwassen. The Saanich Peninsula has comparable prices to the core of Victoria. It's about 20 to 30 kilometers outside the core. And in terms of development, I would say it's fair to very poor. One of the reasons it's very poor is, for example, Central Saanich has considerable ALR land in green, so growth in their official community plan is completely focused on infill. By the way, note to self, if you want people to look at the green, don't have a green background in addition to the green you want them to focus on. That's just a note to me. The West Shore, this is less expensive than the core. It's about 15 to 35 kilometers out to Souk, roughly. Metchosin and Highlands would be considered anti-development. Souk and Colwood, a little more pro-development. And then, of course, Langford would get a gold star. This is Hockley Avenue in Langford in 2012. It's about a block off the main drag in Langford. And this is Hockley Avenue in 2019. So you can see there's been a bit of a growth spurt here in Langford. Now let's move on to the core. It's the most expensive area. Oak Bay is not development friendly. Saanich is quite challenging. Some opportunities exist in View Royal, and Victoria, I'm sorry to say, in my opinion, has lost the plot. Victoria mandated 20% affordable rentals in residential projects in 2018. In fact, they had one city councillor that wanted to have that number be 50%. And the response was that a requirement of 20% affordable housing would not push developers to build more rentals. It would do the opposite. It would send a loud and clear message to developers that they're not welcome in the city, and it would push them to other municipalities. So that was in 2018. Fast forward to 2020, new housing up 30% in Esquimalt, down 60% in Victoria. That was a headline in December. Last month, the migration of developers and builders out of Victoria continues due to high costs and an obstructive council. So earlier when I said there's Greater Victoria, fantastic, and there's the city of Victoria, that's the meanwhile, in Esquimalt, it's now opening up. And of course, Esquimalt is just next door to Victoria. In mid-2018, just as an aside, a builder and developer of a townhouse project in Esquimalt brought me in to help move the approval process along. We held public meetings, had individual meetings with neighbors, did some door knocking, and I presented to both the township's design review committee and council. And the idea was to develop this duplex property and turn it into some townhomes. We were looking at creating 7 townhomes in the area. And my main argument that I worked on with Esquimalt was that the city or the township had a very pronounced missing middle, or a large segment of housing that is not available to residents. And I'm happy to say that my points were cited when council approved the project last year. And they even noted the missing middle in their strategic priorities, strategic planning document that was produced last May, which may not have been because I said missing middle. Anyway, Esquimalt notably has much lower prices than Oak Bay and Victoria. And that's one of the reasons why it looks to be something that's quite desirable from a development standpoint as well. The other thing that you need to note about Esquimalt is that it cuts 10 kilometers off the commute into and out of Victoria if you compare it to Langford, which is quite a dramatic amount. If we look at the commuting duration statistics, 49.8% of Langford residents spend 30 or more minutes commuting to work, and 23% by comparison commute in Esquimalt for 30 minutes more. So there's quite a significant difference there. Meanwhile, the prices in Esquimalt and Langford are almost exactly the same, even though Esquimalt is 10 kilometers closer to town. If we look at the housing starts, you can see there's quite a difference in housing starts between Langford and Esquimalt, but Esquimalt is starting to move the needle in recent years. In fact, historically, housing starts in Esquimalt are now almost as high as they've ever been. If we look at rents, rents are much lower on average in Esquimalt, on average, than they are in Langford. But that's because Langford's portfolio of rental properties are almost entirely new, whereas almost all of the properties in Esquimalt are old. So again, the reason Langford rents have risen faster than those in Esquimalt is simply because the new builds can charge market rents. This is the vacancy rate. You can see that the vacancy rate in Langford has started to tick up. The 2-bedroom was 1% back in October 2016. It's now 2.1, which is still pretty low, given thousands of rental units have been built out there. By contrast, the vacancy rate in Esquimalt is only 1.1%, which is pretty darn low. For those of you who aren't familiar with Victoria, just to from a map standpoint, I kind of grew up in Vancouver, as I mentioned, so I like to be able to convert the distance. So if you go from downtown Victoria to Esquimalt on the left, and the equivalent distance in Vancouver would be like from Robson and Granville to about Queen Elizabeth Park. Some facts about Esquimalt. The First Nations expression Esquimalt translates into place of shoaling waters. Esquimalt has 2 major employers, the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt and Esquimalt's Graving Dock. Esquimalt has one of the highest ratio of jobs to residents because of the Canadian Forces Base. In fact, CFB Esquimalt is so large it's sometimes referred to as Greater Victoria's 14th municipality. The federal lands of CFB Esquimalt in gray make up just over 25% of the city's total land area. So that was one of those surprising facts that I didn't know before I put this presentation together. CFB Esquimalt is not just Esquimalt's largest employer, it is the 3rd largest employer in all of Greater Victoria. It employs some 4,000 military personnel and another 2,000 civilians. Many of the military personnel are reposted from other bases like Halifax and cannot afford to purchase a home in Victoria. Just for interest's sake, the average price of a home sold in Halifax in December was $320,000, which is about 1/3 the price of a house in Victoria. One of the major projects taking place in Esquimalt is their Esquimalt Town Square. The Town Square project is one of several major recent developments under construction in the municipality, with others in the pipeline. The mayor has actually been in place now for 12 years. She's one of Greater Victoria's longest serving mayors now, and started out with the question of how they could increase the tax base and add growth to the city. So they are on a bit of a growth spurt. This Town Square project, by the way, has 2 6-story buildings, multifamily rental, office space, ground floor retail, 4-story mass timber library as well, and a community plaza. In terms of their official community plan, they're looking at densification. They want to attract more business. They have a revitalization tax exemption program and improvements of existing public infrastructure. And that revitalization tax exemption bylaw incentivizes development near Esquimalt Road, which is the primary road down Esquimalt. Esquimalt has some of the least expensive average rents because there are so many older rental buildings in the township like these. All of these can be seen along Esquimalt Road, by the way. And the missing middle is what lies between all these older rental apartment buildings and the single family homes, which are often out of reach for many families. Many of these longtime residents are paying well below market rent. Sadly, if they're rent evicted, these residents and tenants simply have no chance of replacing what they have now. So obviously the province and the city are frowning on any developer kind of buying these up and then evicting the tenants to redevelop the properties. When new rental buildings do become available in Esquimalt, they can charge market rents, and it's interesting to note that those market rents will be even higher than those currently charged in Langford. Unlike the West Shore, Esquimalt doesn't have any land area that can be used to develop new single-family subdivisions unless someday the federal government decides to sell off the Macaulay Point lands, which are noted on the slide here. In fact, the official community plan of Esquimalt also notes these lands and that they would fall under the official community plan of Esquimalt if the federal government ever decides to sell those 168 acres. As of this month, Victoria no longer flushes raw sewage into the ocean after the area opens the treatment plant. That was news this month. Long time coming. In terms of housing, again in Esquimalt, the single-family detached houses are down 1.7% since 2001, and apartments are up by 23%. Now, how would houses be down and apartments up? Well, basically people doing land assemblies and then turning around and using the land where the single-family homes are to turn around and build apartment buildings. Thus, you lose some single-family home stock. And the trend is toward multifamily dwellings and away from single detached dwellings. Household types, this is interesting to note if you're wanting to develop an apartment building. 40% of residents in Esquimalt are one-person households, and another 36% only have 2 people in the household. If we look at what's available in the market right now, so I go active single-family homes in Esquimalt, there are a grand total of 2. In fact, there are so few single-family homes listed for sale in Esquimalt that a baby can count them on one hand. I'm just going to leave that slide up for 2 seconds. These are the 2 properties that are currently for sale. 1.175 and 1,069,000 are the prices. Housing and community objectives. Obviously, the OCP is looking at particular areas where they want the development and densification to take place. In addition to the Town Square, West Bay Triangle, the Esquimalt Corridor, land around Admirals and the ENN rail line, and land north of Esquimalt Road between Admirals and the base. And they're looking at developments up to 6 stories in height. Interestingly, there's an even split between owners and renters in Esquimalt, which is different than Greater Victoria, where home ownership rate is about 60%. Labor force, if we look at Esquimalt's top 3 industries, public administration is top, followed by healthcare and retail. The mode of transportation used in 2016, 56% of Esquimalt residents drive to work on a regular basis. Interesting to note, 11% walk to work. and 8.7% bike. So, in summary, Canada wants immigrants. The world wants to come to Canada. The immigration doors are about to be flung open after the pandemic. BC is the favored province for Canadian migrants. Greater Victoria is the favored region. We are at the end of the rainbow. COVID has dramatically accelerated the movement of people. Vancouver makes Victoria look cheap as borscht. I don't know if that's borscht, but I think it's borscht. When I typed in borscht into Google, that's the picture that came up. Langford is booming, but Esquimalt slashes the commute. And Esquimalt wants development. So originally I said Esquimalt might just be the center of the real estate investing universe. What do you think? Is Esquimalt the place, and is now the time? In terms of your intuition, what's your gut feeling? In terms of your logic, is my reasoning systematic? Evidence, is the evidence that I've presented verifiable, and is the source credible? This is Sherry and I, by the way. Our first real estate investment was a condo in this building in 1997, and we still own that building today. We actually bought that property while we ourselves were still renters. Between 97 and 2013, we did some 30 personal real estate transactions. Most were investment properties, condos, houses, and most of those were joint ventures. In 2014, we built this 20-unit purpose-built rental apartment building in Langford. We built this 30-unit purpose-built rental in 2017. We built this 63-unit purpose-built rental in Langford in 2019. And we're 4-time winners of the Deal of the Year award with Aussie Jurox Real Estate Action Group. We won in 2014 for Best Joint Venture Deal. In 2016, Best Joint Venture Deal again. In 2018, we won for Best Land Deal, and there's Sherry with the plaque as well. And in 2019, these fine-looking gentlemen presented us with the Best Joint Venture Deal award again. So I hope I have been a credible source for you. If you're looking at something in Victoria, we'd love to be your go-to realtors. But in the meantime, there is something more, and I'm going to throw it back to Liza.